It's my great pleasure today to be able to introduce our program and introduce the Honorable Germán Vera to speak with us today. I'll get to that introduction in a minute. I'm David Hunter. I'm the professor of international environmental law here, and also the director of the environmental law program as well as the international legal studies program. I've also been, for nearly 20 years, engaged in the international climate negotiations. Can you hear me better now? That was a test. Just do that some more if you can't hear me. But for 20 years I've been involved in the international climate negotiations, dating back before 1992 when the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was first negotiated. And through that time, one thing we've observed is, maybe three things we've observed. The negotiations keep getting bigger. More and more people keep coming to them. More attention is put on them. And we've had some of the largest international environmental or international law gatherings of any kind associated with the climate negotiations. And this upcoming negotiation in Lima, Peru will be no different. The other thing that has continued is that the expectations have grown. Or maybe they've ebbed and flowed, but we keep having expectations that these negotiations will result in significant policy changes and directions. And I can say that over the 20 years, we have seen the international climate negotiations do some very important and take very important steps for addressing climate change. We tend to spend our time thinking about everything we haven't done, but we should recognize that these negotiations have been truly remarkable. They're trying to address one of the most difficult issues the international community has ever seen, an issue that relates to every aspect of the economy, as well as very significant, if not catastrophic, environmental impacts that will also have impacts on every aspect of the economy. And they reflect, they bring to the table all the differences of the different countries, their different economic developments, levels, their different interests in the future, their different governance approaches, their different approaches to the environment. And so the overall vision and mission of having 195 countries reach agreement on something as profound as climate change is an incredibly ambitious undertaking. And this year, that undertaking shifts to Lima, Peru. And it is a stepping stone unto itself, but an important meeting unto itself and a stepping stone in the broader process. It is, as we'll hear, a critically important meeting because it's the meeting right before the 2015 meeting in Paris. And as we'll learn, the negotiations over the last 25 years have had a certain rhythm to them. What happens is the parties agree to a certain date. So they agreed that by 2007 they would have certain standards, and that led to the Kyoto Protocol. They agreed that by 2009 they would have other meet for an international comprehensive agreement, and that led to the big Copenhagen Summit in 2009. They've now agreed to come to a comprehensive international instrument that has some legal effect by 2015. The other thing about negotiations is that by the time you get to the last negotiation, you want to have as few issues on the table as you possibly can. The diplomats have to have resolved the big issues before they get to Paris. They have one major big chance to do that, and that's in Lima, Peru. This is the year and the negotiation in which we have to narrow the issues, put the issues on the table, but narrow those issues of disagreement so that we can reach that comprehensive agreement in Paris. If we're not successful in doing that in Lima, we won't be successful in Peru, or in Paris, a year later. The other thing I want to say, maybe to set up Mr. Vera, is that the host country has a vital role in international negotiations, and it's a unique role. In addition to having to provide the whole space and structure and location for the meeting, and that's no small initiative because this is a very complicated, lot of moving parts. including the fact that you want to have the governments be able to meet without the rabble, without the outsiders. But you also want to give the outsiders some access, or else they'll get even angrier. I'm an outsider always, so when I don't get into the meeting, like it was very difficult in Copenhagen, I tend to lean towards the protesters and start to complain that the government of Denmark didn't do a very good job of organizing the meeting. So it's a very high pressure position. But also, diplomatically, Peru takes on a very important leadership role in not only leading the negotiations, but also in having a responsibility, and there may be the only country, the host may be the only country that has the responsibility and feels the responsibility to get an agreement. The others are all there with their own, putting their own interests first. Not that Peru doesn't put its own interests first, but as the host, they have a vested interest in an agreement, in promoting the interests of the agreement. And they're viewed that way by the other parties. They're viewed as the one whose responsibility is to bring everybody to the table. And that's, sometimes you can do it and sometimes you can't. But it depends on the diplomacy and skills of the host country, as well as a little bit of good luck. So with that as setting a little bit of the stage of what's at stake and the role of Peru, I want to say how pleased we are to be able to welcome Germán Vera here today. He's been a long-standing diplomat of Peru. He's currently a special advisor to the Peruvian Ministry of Natural Resources, Commission of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's an advisor to the Commission of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Peru for the COP20. This is the COP20, we call it the Conference of the Parties of the 20th Conference of the Parties, which is the 20th anniversary also of the ratification of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. He's been the General Counsel of Peru in Washington, D.C. back in 2006, and he's worked as a diplomat for his country in Europe, in The Hague, in the Netherlands, in Central America, in Panama, and Honduras. He's been a professor at several universities in Peru, and the author of several books on international environmental law, including his latest book, a book on climate change, and an introduction to climate change for Peru businesses and for the government to kind of set the stage for what Peru would be hosting. He's been our guest before at American University, and it's terrific to welcome him back and to give him this opportunity to talk about the preparations that Peru is making. Please welcome Germán Vera.
Thanks very much for having me this afternoon. I have prepared a few notes to speak to you about this interesting subject. First of all, allow me to thank first and foremost Professor David Hunter for inviting me to the Washington College of Law on this beautiful afternoon. A little cold, I would say, but nice. David has very kind, generous, and supportive with several generations of Latin American students in this prestigious university in the nation's capital. Although Dean Claudio Grossman is not here, I would like to thank also him as a leading expert in the area of international law and in the field of human rights for his kindness and friendship. I remember I had a dinner with Dean Grossman back in 2012 in Panama City with other graduates of the LLM program. And it was such a lovely evening with delicious Chilean wine, because he's from Chile. For me, the Chilean wine is one of the best in the world. I am also particularly proud to be here with our former defense attaché at the Peruvian representation to the Organization of American States, General Jaime Salinas Edo, who did such an outstanding job some years ago in our representation. I have to tell you that today I feel like Alfonso Cuarón. You know, the Mexican movie director that won the Golden Globe a few weeks ago. He also, I think, he won also the Oscar.
Yes.
2 days ago. Yes. He asked the evening when he won the Golden Globe award for the sympathy of the audience, in particular for his thick Spanish accent. Having said that, it's always wonderful to be in this remarkable, beautiful, historic building where several generations of professors and students have devoted their efforts to the noble discipline of international law. The title of my presentation, as you can see over there, is Looking Ahead to the International Climate Change Negotiations in Lima for COP21. I also will take advantage of this opportunity to talk to you about my recent book, Climate Change in International Law, a vision for citizens and business in Peru and Latin America, which fortunately pretty much covers the aspects of my presentation. I can show you the book here. This is the book. And it says here, para entender la Cumbre Mundial de Cambio Climático de Lima en el año 2014. Something like to understand the COP20 in 2014. It's a quote from a phrase of David. It's over here.
I was so honored to see that.
I have to tell you also that the foreword of my book has been written by Professor Hunter, and although my book is in Spanish, a translation in English is forthcoming for the COP20 in December with the support of the Finnish Embassy in Lima. Also, I am very honored to announce that David will present the English version of the book in Lima next December. He told me that just a few minutes ago that he would be happy to take some students to Lima in December, you know, if the appropriate fundings are found, and because it would be for students of international law a good experience to be in this kind of negotiation. As you know, the 20th Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Climate Change Convention will be conducted in the capital of my country, the city of Lima, from the 1st to the 12th of December. Delegations from around 194 countries will attend this international summit. On average, more than 12,000 people from all over the world will come to Peru in December, making this the largest event ever held in my country. It's a big task for us. About the topic of climate change, US State Secretary John Kerry has indicated that the threat of climate change is one of the most important challenges of the international agenda, since its effects are increasingly visible. The effects of climate change can be noticed every day when we see the melting glaciers in Peru, when we notice the modification of the hydrological cycles in South America, and when we observe floods, tsunamis, and hurricanes in the United States, Asia, and Central America. And truth be told, as David mentioned, the international legal remedies, the Climate Change Convention, and the Kyoto Protocol are insufficient to address this threat to humanity. As you know, the international financial crisis began in 2008, and it was in 2009 when, during the Climate Change Summit in Copenhagen, the world changed its approach on the issue of climate change, and developed countries simply stopped meeting their Kyoto commitments, and therefore all countries of the world were released to solve the problems related to climate change in an individual manner. This situation is very regrettable. However, since the threat of climate change does not recognize national boundaries, international cooperation in solving this problem is essential. there lies the importance of the climate summit that will be carried out in my country next year. I want to show you now the official logo of the COP20 in Lima. That's the one. Some people say that it's not as pretty as the logo of the World Cup in Brazil. Regarding the official logo, Manuel Pulgar Vidal, the Peruvian Minister of Environment, friend of David and mine, has stated that the logo of the COP20 represents the planet. It consists of 20 rings. The inner ring is red, which represents the increase of temperature in the atmosphere by the presence of greenhouse gases that generates climate change. The ring 20 is blue, as a sign of optimism for an agreement that would stabilize the temperature of the planet. The COP20 will continue in Lima what was agreed at the COP19 in Warsaw, which was held in November of last year. In Lima, we and the world expect that an agreement of a new convention on climate change can be reached to be adopted in the COP21 in Paris in the year 2015. It is expected that in Paris, a new binding convention will be adopted to allow countries to continue growing economically, but at the same time allowing them to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases that cause global warming and climate change. The central problem of the current negotiation is to adopt a universal agreement in 2015, which will give leverage to the ultimate objective of the convention, that is, to achieve a stabilization of greenhouse gases at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate change. This objective affects many public and private interests that comprise several economic sectors that generates emissions such as electricity, transportation, industry, agriculture, deforestation, and waste management of solids and liquids. This situation has led, on the one hand, to old north-south differences, and on the other hand, has created new divergences on historical responsibility and its implications for the type and extent of obligations to be assumed by developed countries. Therefore, the subject of financial funding, capacity building, and technology transfer are particularly important in the negotiation in order to improve resilience to combat the visible effects of climate change. Beyond the substantive disagreements, several procedural differences have created a crisis of confidence between the parties. I mean, the developed countries and developing countries. This crisis of confidence could be overcome in Lima only if all countries make concessions to achieve a global binding agreement with ambitious and credible domestic commitments. Allow me to quote now President of Peru, Ollanta Humala, my boss, in relation to the forthcoming COP20 to be celebrated in Lima. President Humala made this statement in the recent summit of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC in Spanish, held in Havana last January. The President said in that opportunity, that's President Humala and Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations. President Humala stated that in that opportunity, the Lima COP preparatory process involves intense work, both in the organization and in the management of the agreements being set on different levels, so that in the near future we hope to have in 2015 a new regime to fight against climate change. The President added that to achieve this, it is necessary that the international community make concrete commitments to globally mitigate emissions, particularly and especially in Latin America. He also mentioned that urgent efforts of adaptation should be made, and it's necessary to channel to the developing countries the resources, knowledge, and technology already developed in the industrialized world. Peru is aware of the harmful effects of climate change and wants to show its solidarity with the people who suffer the adverse effects of this climate change. The venue of the meeting will be in the new Lima Convention Center that is being built at this moment. It is located in the district of San Borja in Lima. The previous building there was the former Ministry of Defense of Peru. Please allow me to show some pictures of the convention center where the COP20 will be developed. General Salinas probably remember very well the building. I wanted to find a high definition photographs, but that I could. So that is the place. Now I would like to explain why the COP20 will take place in my country. First of all, Peru was nominated by the Latin American and Caribbean group, GRULAC in Spanish, to organize this conference. But on the other hand, it is because my country has the adequate conditions to organize the COP20 that it was elected. According to what experts say, Peru is the star of Latin American economy. My country had an average economic growth of 6.4% from 2002 to 2012. Peru is one of the fastest growing economies in both the Latin American region and the world. In 2013, the economic growth of Peru was of 5.4% higher than the Latin American average figure that was around 2.2%. Similarly, inflation in my country is below 2.5%. Also, in Peru, poverty has been reduced from 59 in 2004 to 26% in 2013. According to the Inter-American Development Bank, half of Peruvian families are now in the middle class. However, truth be told, Peru still faces some problems in relation to the environment. Since the main economic activity in Peru is mining, some unresolved issues between this activity and indigenous population still exist. Illegal mining is also another problem for my country. During the conference, Peru Strengthening and Investing in Water Management, organized in Lima by the America Society and the Council of the Americas, last year, Peruvian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Eda Rivas, my lady boss, talked about climate change in Peru. Minister Rivas said in that opportunity that Peru is the third most vulnerable country when it comes to climate change effects, even though it remains a source of many natural resources. As you know, Peru is the first producer of gold in the world and the third producer of copper also in the world. Minister Rivas also said in that occasion that Peruvians are used to having many natural resources. Now we have to be more innovative to stop wasting them. I fully agree with her. As you know, Peru is a country with one of the largest water reserves in the world as well. I can tell you that the Peruvian government is fully committed to make this summit a successful one. The COP20 in Peru will try to negotiate and close a global agreement that will be adopted in Paris in 2015, as we have said. Formally, this conference should close the deals on the final list of items that will be part of the Universal Agreement of 2015. Politically, it is presumed that the conference should contribute decisively to unlock major disagreements on mitigation, technology, and financing. This is Manuel Pulgar and Mrs. Eda Riva, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Peru. And the law.
He's looking pretty good.
Yes, he is. In this perspective, it should be stressed that the success of the overall process and the success of the conference in Lima will depend on the Leaders Summit on Climate Change, convened by the Secretary General of the United Nations in September of this year in New York. Peruvian presidency of COP20 and the Peruvian team of diplomats and important members of the government led by the Ministry of Environment will try to be consistent with the Peruvian position on climate change, which can be described as moderate on several sensitive issues. In fact, Peru has insisted in its status of highly vulnerable country to climate change and claimed, therefore, an ambitious and binding global new agreement. Along with other states, such as the Association of Independent States of Latin America and the Caribbean, AILAC in Spanish, group comprised by Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Panama, and Mexico, Peru has reiterated that developing countries, including middle-income ones, should receive predictable and meaningful financial assistance. Peru has also accepted that developing countries could undertake mitigation commitments, but only on the basis of the application of the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities according to their respective capabilities, for which it has proposed a program that contains clear economic incentives for national mitigation strategies and adaptation. Now, I would like to come back to my book. Definitely one of the most important elements that we need to combat climate change is to create more industries that are sustainable and friendly to the environment. That sounds pretty good, yeah, actually. In my book, I explain how 3 Peruvian companies, an airline, a bank, and a university have successfully managed to reduce their carbon footprint. Let me put only the example of the airline LAN Peru, a Peruvian company whose shareholders are mostly from Chilean origin. LAN Peru in 2012 neutralized the equivalent of 7,000 tons of CO2 emissions. The certification of the reduction of the carbon footprint of LAN Peru was made by a certification company called Spanish Association for Standardization and Certification, AENOR in Spanish. The neutralization was done through the purchase of certified CO2 bonds for a reforestation project with native forest species in Ucayali, a region in the Amazonian area of my country. As pointed out by the same airline, the scope of measuring the carbon footprint of the company in Peru considered all activities that generates direct and indirect emissions of greenhouse gases, such as emissions resulting from air operations, HVAC equipment, electric power consumption of sales offices and administration, ground equipment emissions from transportation of employees and business air travel. This is an interesting way of doing business and at the same time protect the environment, reducing the greenhouse emissions that creates global warming. Another example is Copa Airlines in Panama that also contributes through a Panamanian NGO with projects of reforestation in its country. To sum up my presentation, I would like to stress that the problem of climate change is not an environmental one. It is fundamentally an economic and political problem. To solve this problem, it is necessary that the international community reach consensus and make compromises to adopt a new global convention that replaces the Rio de Janeiro Convention on Climate Change of 1992 and the Kyoto Protocol of 1997. This new agreement should be adopted in the COP21 in Paris. Peru in the COP21 will work towards that objective. At the end of my speech, I want to thank again to the Washington College of Law and Professor David Hunter for having me today. I want to thank General Jaime Salinas, who is with us this afternoon, and And finally, I would like to thank the Embassy and the Consulate of Peru in Washington and the representation to the Organization of American States, the Peruvian representation there, for his support. And also to all of you for your distinguished attendance, for your patience and presence here. Thank you very much. Gracias. Thank you.
I'm going to say, I'm going to make just a couple quick remarks, and then we'll take a few questions. First, thank you very much, Germán, both for the comments and for the work you've done over the years to promote international law and international environmental law in South America and elsewhere in Peru. I wanted to just comment on a couple of things and maybe add a little bit as well. First, the COP goes to Peru this year partly because it rotates through the regions. So it's in South America this year, it'll be in Europe next year, it'll be in Africa the year after, so we can predict these things. But it's very fortuitous that it's in Peru this year, not only because the country is so important and the economy is so tied to natural resources and thus climate change is something that is of high priority. I think we're also very fortuitous of the government in place, and I can say that Manuel, as a friend and someone I've known for many years, that Manuel Polgar is in the position that he's in. He was a founder and longtime director of an independent environmental law group called SPDA, Sociedad Peruana de Derecho Ambiental, before he was elevated to be the Minister of Environment. And I think this is a good thing for those of us who are environmentalists and interested in a progressive approach to climate change, because I think the fact that he's been given this position gives us a very big opportunity as he takes this leadership role in the climate negotiations. It also gives us an opportunity, and as Germán said, I am hoping to once again take a few students to Lima next year. If you're interested, you should get on the list with Erica. We have to sort it out. There's funding issues. There's also access issues, and I have to say it. My apologies to the general here. I have to say that it worries me that it's at the former Defense Ministry, because one of the issues will be access for the public and the students, but that access usually comes down to the size of the venue and whether people will be able to get in. But and in recent years, the UN has been reducing the size ever since 25,000 people tried to get into the Copenhagen summit. So we'll see if we can balance that. But I do think it will be a terrific opportunity, and as mentioned, I'm sure we'll be able to have the opportunity to host and do some side meetings with the book, and perhaps we can get Manuel there as well from the Ministry of Environment. Just a few words on the substance. Germán alluded to this, that we could say a lot about what the substantive problems are, or the obstacles to agreement, but they remain sort of the same one that we faced for a while. We don't have a political philosophy right now, that a framework that allows the countries to realize how they will reach consensus. And what I mean by that is that historically the framework for the last 18 years anyways, or for the first 18 years of the climate negotiations, was a consensus agreement on this idea of shared responsibility, but common responsibilities, but differentiated on the basis of who's caused climate change and what resources they have. So in practical terms, that meant a differentiation of the responsibilities between developing countries and developed countries. And that was embodied in this principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. To be honest, the consensus around that principle has broken down, not so much around the principle, but around its application into which countries. The United States in particular has said, yes, we can still have common but differentiated responsibilities, but now how we differentiate them is going to be different, given the rise of emerging middle-income countries, particularly China, India, and Brazil, and the current contribution that they make to climate change. That means we have to recalibrate and change how we approach this principle. And of course that's resisted by developing countries because they look at the historical contributions of the United States and Europe, as well as the resources that we command, and they say, we're not so sure we want to refine or recalibrate. There's no consensus yet on that recalibration, whether it has to occur or how it will occur. And without that political framework, it's very hard to reach agreement on issues like how much money and under what terms developed countries should provide financing in climate, or how much commitment and on what terms should developing countries take a mitigation pledge. And tying that together also is that it's convenient then to hide behind that lack of consensus for countries. So for the United States, for example, they can hide behind that lack of consensus with China and obscure the fact that we don't, at home, domestically, have a commitment to take such great steps anyways. So it's a very hard thing to figure out how we move to a consensus when we don't, if we don't have some general agreement of the framework, and when both, I would say both the United States on one hand, just to use these countries, and China on the other, can hide behind the argument over that rhetoric to avoid getting into the details. And I use those two countries as an example. There are a lot of countries hiding behind the rhetoric. But so where does that leave? It doesn't mean we're not making progress. I want to say that there was tremendous progress in Warsaw, particularly on forests. And to some extent, the forest package now doesn't need to be really that negotiated in Peru. So it's set up. It allows people to have some predictability of how forests will be implemented in the climate regime. It allows countries to determine how they will approach their mitigation steps, knowing more or less what the rules are in forests. So that big and contentious area over the last 6 years has been pretty much reached consensus on the general guidelines and policies. But there are significant major issues out. Like most negotiations in the world, climate change is also about money. And maybe the biggest sticking point will continue to be how much money and whether it will be promised by the developed countries for the support of developing countries, both to address climate change, to mitigate it, and to adapt to it. So in Copenhagen, there was a promise by the United States and the rest of the donor countries, developed countries, to give $100 billion a year. 100 billion with a B, that's a lot of money, by 2020. Does anybody know how much has been actually pledged so far to the Global Climate Fund, for example? About 70 million, give or take 70 million with an M. Now, partly the argument is that, that's to the Global Climate Fund. Partly the argument is that, well, the fund wasn't set up yet, so countries are waiting. Partly it's, and that's true, another progress we've made is that the Global Climate Fund operational procedures are essentially set up now. So that excuse doesn't exist. So one thing that will happen in Peru is countries are expected to come forward and announce how much money they're willing to give to the new GCF and to climate financing generally, and in concrete pledges, not just sort of aspiring to what will happen in 2020, but this is the amount of money we're going to give today. But that's still a pretty big gap between the 100 billion a year that's sort of being asked for and was promised, and the amount that we're at right now. President Obama just asked for $1 billion in climate financing, or will be in his budget, but $1 billion is not completely our share of the 100 billion, so we're still a little short. Climate finance overall through multilateral aids has dropped some 70% in the last few years. So we can see that there's a big gap on finance. As I said, countries may have been waiting. We'll leave them on their thing. Maybe they were waiting for the Global Climate Fund to get up and running in South Korea, as it is going to be up and running and has the operational procedures. Now there's no excuse. They can make their pledges. That pledge is directly tied to how ambitious the mitigation targets will be of the developing countries and of other countries as well, but primarily the developing countries, which again is tied directly to how ambitious the pledges will be from the donor countries. And these things are all integrated. So if you want to see whether we're going to have success, a lot of attention is put on what are countries promising to do directly, what are their binding targets, but but I would say follow the money as well. If we're going to have success in Peru, we're going to have to see some bigger dollars being talked about as coming from the northern countries. At the same time, countries will come to Peru ready to, some of them will, I'm not sure the US will, they sometimes hide these things to the last minute, but countries will come and start announcing what they're willing to commit to. And that'll be a very important step because it'll be transparent about what their commitments are willing to be made as a framework in the Paris Convention. So countries will come forward and say, we're willing to do X if other countries agree. And this will be really the time when those mitigation targets start to come together. So that will be a very important thing to look at. As well as a lot of issues around technology, agriculture, in the form of the agreement even, how exactly this will be put together. I'll end there. Perhaps we can have a few questions, but I hope all of you will pay attention to this as it comes through, and hopefully a few of you will be able to participate in different ways in the negotiations in Lima. I don't know whether it will be a successful negotiation, because that will be up to a lot of different countries, but I know we will be graciously and well hosted, because that's up to Peru. Thank you. So we can take questions if people have any. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your appraisal of the situation, the topic, and the discussion. I was wondering, how would you describe the relations of the government of Peru with those governments that they have taken their places in ALBA organization, ALBA? You know, Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, Argentina. Do you consult with them? And what do you think they say about these things? International and international climate.
Oh no!
I wouldn't stress the difference between these two groups of Latin American states. I would say the difference is, I would base the difference in the fact that if they have oil or not. I mean, petróleo. So if they have large reserves of oil, like Venezuela or like Ecuador, or if they don't. That's the difference in climate change. That's the difference between these two groups. Not ideological differences exist, at least in that aspect. In the things related to democracy or human rights, probably there is a big gap, a big difference between those two groups of countries. But in climate change, is basically if they possess oil or not. That's my opinion.
I think it's been interesting from a global perspective that the populist left countries, Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela to some extent, have positioned themselves very interesting in the negotiations, aligning themselves with the climate justice movement of civil society and taking a pretty, let's say, progressive environmental position, but also one that's a little marginalized in the negotiations. And I think it also hides, I think the comment about the basis of the oil of the economy being a very important one. But it has been interesting to see that that set of countries and a few others aligned to some extent with the island states and others to be able to promote a very progressive vision of climate change. Again, somewhat marginalized, perhaps from where there could really be hopes to have an agreement. So I think it'll be part of the delicate diplomacy that will have to come through. Other questions? Yeah, in the back.
Hi. Thank you for your words. They're very, very useful. My name is Lou Leonard. I lead the climate change program at World Wildlife Fund down the street, and I was in Lima just a couple of weeks ago. what's your sense of how the COP is playing at home in Peru? A lot of times when a country is the host of the COP, it provides some opportunities for the issues related to climate change and energy to rise on the political agenda at home. What's your sense of how the business community, key political stakeholders in Peru are thinking about the opportunity in Lima? Is it on their radar at all? Is it going to help the minister be able to advance his domestic agenda? What's your sense of how this is playing at home?
Thank you very much for your question. I will give you my personal view, not as a public officer, but as a citizen.
We'll edit this part out of the.
Firstly, we have a logistical problem because we don't have in Lima 15,000 hotel rooms. So we start to register in houses to accommodate people who will visit Lima. So that's one thing. About the business community, the government is making efforts to invite the Peruvian business community to participate in the COP20. Since Peru is the first producer of gold and the third producer of copper in the world, the business community is more orientated to mining. So this kind of event in Peru stresses them a little bit. They feel worried about what will happen in December. So, but the government is making big efforts to convocate them, to allow them to participate in an organized manner. Another point to be mentioned here is that for Peru is a great opportunity to show the beauties of the country. Machu Picchu, the lakes, we have the Amazonian, the bird watching, and those things. So touristic agencies in Peru are crazy now. They are planning packages for anything in December. They are at that point. The touristic business community is really happy, and they welcome all of you there.
How about in the popular press? Is it talked about very often?
Yes. We were talking with the General Jaime Salinas some minutes ago about that. The main newspaper of Peru, El Comercio, and such like a Washington Post here, is starting to put some articles about the COP20 and the implicances and the importance of the COP. But that is just starting. I think this month they started that. I think that.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Thais Ludwig. I'm a student here. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm dual citizen of Brazil, so for me, I'm listening to all this and it's really interesting because I'm kind of relating it to issues going on in Brazil with deforestation and climate change and everything. Now, my question is, how do the people in general kind of view not just the COP20, but the idea of sustainable development in general? I know in Brazil, people are very not too pleased about the idea of outsiders kind of coming in and trying to force their way or trying to have an impact on the nation's portion of the Amazon and the environment. So I'm kind of curious, how are the people in Peru kind of dealing with those issues? Is there a positive view of it? Is there more of a negative view of outsiders coming in, of international agreements kind of affecting their own policy?
That's a very interesting question. You know, in Peru, we have a great quantity of people who belongs to the original communities, to the indigenous communities. So I'm not sure if they are really aware of this COP20. Peru is a big country, it's like the size of France.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the media and the people who live in Lima, we are 11 million in Lima, we are pretty much interested in the subject, but the other parts of the country probably are not. But this is a big task for us. I mean, one thing that we have to mention is that next year, after the conference, 2015, the Board of Governors of the World Bank will meet in Peru in the same new convention center that will be made for the COP20. So something in relation, probably we can think that there is something in relation to that. I mean, the table is bigger than we think.
Well, we've typically taken students to the annual meetings in the fall here at the World Bank when they're in Washington, so maybe we'll bring students again to Lima. And it won't be 15,000.
Business law students.
Yeah,
Yes,
business law students.
definitely.
Any other questions? If not, I'll take this opportunity to do two things. One, for anybody who's from here, they know nothing happens in the environmental here without Erica Lennon, so I want, this is no exception, so I want to thank Erica for, and I want to thank again Germán for coming here and presenting today. And we have a little gift. Instead of a pen, we got you an umbrella. It's not for rain or snow, actually. It's for when things start getting thrown at the COP. You can put it up and protect yourself.
Thank you.